Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world in 30 answers. Discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm with James MacPhail from Healdsburg, California. James actually is a consultant winemaker making wine with a variety of different brands, and he's going to share that with us today. So, James, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself and the labels you're making.
Well, I am a consultant for, as Allison said, a number of brands, 7 in total. And I have been a winemaker for 28 years now and had my own brand for 18 of those years called MacPhail Family Wines. And like a lot of us in this industry, sold it and stayed on as winemaker, but recently left in 2016 to become a consultant. I absolutely love winemaking, and it kind of takes me back to the roots of being able to do what I love to do, and it's making wine.
So tell me a little bit about the primary labels you're making. What kind of wines, what grapes are you working with, and where are you sourcing your fruit from?
So I kind of positioned myself early on in my career as a specialist in Pinot Noir. That was really the varietal that I loved. Even before I started MacPhail Wines, I was working for other producers and making Zinfandel and Sauvignon Blanc and Cabernet. But I found myself always coming home and drinking Pinot Noir. And so in the late 90s, I started to focus on Pinot specifically. And then when I started MacPhail, I was specifically Pinot Noir. And then kind of branded myself that way. And so when I became a consultant, the producers that picked me up ironically, are all Pinot Noir and now Chardonnay specific brands. I now currently source, have long-term contracts with 62 vineyard sources, primarily Russian River and Sonoma Coast appellation. The San Giacomo brand, which I make wines for, they are based in Sonoma, and some of their vineyards are Carneros.
And what is the case production on San Giacomo vineyards?
San Giacomo is around 1,500 total cases. I make 3 different Chardonnays and 3 different Pinot Noirs.
And from them, it's all their estate fruit.
That's correct. Yeah, so they are a 97-year-old farming family. They've been farming wine grapes for over 50 years. Many in the industry, of course, recognize that name because there's been, I think we identified something like over 65 brands that have had the San Giacomo, use San Giacomo fruit or use their name on their brand. And yes, most of their vineyards are Carneros. And then they have a kind of an iconic vineyard that I've worked with for about 18 years called Roberts Road Vineyard, which is right across the street from Gap to Crown. For those of you that are familiar with that name, in the newly created Petaluma Gap.
So very cool climate, wind-strewn areas.
Very, yes. It's had many talks here at the World of Pinot with customers and trade and press about the Petaluma Gap. And of course, now that it is its own AVA, and the reason why is how wines have been so distinct from this specific geographical area. And it really comes down to the wind. We have obviously being in the Petaluma Gap and the freeway for the fog, and soil types, of course, are very unique to the appellation. But it really comes down to the wind. You can go out to vineyards in the Petaluma Gap and you can see the vines in July are kind of leaning at about a 45-degree angle, and it really kind of toughens the skins up a little bit. And I find the wines from that area have a really unique backbone, kind of a structure to them that's very tasty.
And the San Giacomo vineyard wines, you said about 1,500 cases. Are they available in many markets?
Not yet. Right now, they are 100% direct. We are working on distribution. Of course, with the 16 vintage being the inaugural vintage, we're just releasing, just started the 17 vintage. The 16 sold out pretty quick, which was great. And so we're slowly increasing production and actually currently in talks with distribution.
And then I know you also have a label with your wife. Tell me a little bit about that.
So my wife and I started another brand, of course, because as winemakers do, you can't stop creating brands, which we love to do. And so we started a brand in 2012 called Tongue Dancer Wines. And my wife, Carrie, gave me a little carte blanche to kind of help come up with the name. And so I've worked with a graphic artist, designer for many years and created many labels with him. It's very, very creative. He was Levi Strauss's original art director in the 60s and 70s, and he still lives in Healdsburg. And I love to sit down with him and just get creative. And when we started this brand, I wanted a brand that kind of resonated what we always love about wine, some of those kind of tangible and intangible aspects about wine. So I love wines with mouthfeel, texture, weight, wines that when you put in your mouth, you kind of, they resonate, they touch all those different nerves and they make you think. And so the creative process with him is really a lot of fun. I sit across the table from him and I tell him the story about what I want this wine to be and everything else. And he's got 3x5 note cards and he has a pencil and he writes down words. And as I'm telling my story, he'll flip up a card and he'll have a name on it or something. And I'll say, no. And then I'll keep telling the story. And I think it was like 3 or 4 cards in, he flipped up Tongue Dancer. And I said, that's it. I always thought that wine should kind of dance on your tongue as well. Again, you put that wine in your mouth, it makes you, think, and it resonates with you. And it's those nerves. The famous quote I always really liked is that wine should, pose more questions than answers. So that was kind of the start of Tongue Dancer. And then, of course, we had to put a graphic with it because, Tongue Dancer could go any direction.
We're only going to go in one direction here.
One direction. So the graphic of the fox with the dancer on the tongue, kind of visually illustrates and defines pretty well what we like about wine.
And how many cases are you making under that label?
We're around 1,000 cases for that.
Also direct to consumer?
Yes, 100%. Yep.
Okay. Well, tell me, what is your first memory relevant to wine?
My first memory is my family. I grew up in Marin County, just over the Golden Gate Bridge. And I grew up in a very kind of a European household. My father always had wine on the table. And he taught my sister and I about wine, which I thought was very unique. And I was just really one of those weird kids growing up where I always liked wine. So even in high school when, I was a bad kid hanging out in front of the liquor store on a Friday night and all my buddies are kind of going after the 6-packs, or something. I was stopping someone and said, hey, buy that bottle there on the second shelf down from the bottom. And wine just always resonated. And I think I owe that to my father who taught us that it was a food, it's part European concept of it's a food, it's part of the table, it should be enjoyed. And my mom and dad, they would have half a bottle, a glass or 2 a night, and that was it. And then they'd have it again on the table the next night. And so I think that's where it started.
And what would you say is the first or most memorable wine you ever drank, and what was the occasion?
Oh boy. Now I am one of those winemakers that I do not have an aha wine. So it was not an experience where I had some life-changing. I actually had got to taste a DRC, or something. And as soon as I turned 21, but I do, it's funny when I first started to buy wine, and I think I got away with it a little bit early, like maybe in my 20s. I started with local wines. And I really, even though the table was growing up mostly European wines, and I felt that that's kind of what, formed and created where I am today as a winemaker, obviously taking that old world elements. It was domestic wines. I remember Fetzer. Fetzer wines kind of early on. Mendocino,
An initial attraction to those cool climates.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's obviously, with the MacPhail brand, I was big and still am, but a large part of that brand was Anderson Valley wines. And yes, I think that style of wine and what you can find in Anderson Valley is very unique.
So have you spent, with all the old world wines you've had the privilege of drinking, have you been able to drink them in their countries? Have you spent any time traveling to other wine regions?
I've started, yes. I also, I started in the wine industry in my kind of mid-20s. And I jumped right in 2 feet, absolutely fell in love with it. And so I'm someone who's very focused. And so in retrospect, I kind of wish I had maybe kind of broken away and taken some time and worked over in France or Italy. I didn't, but I've gone back quite a bit on my own. And I have a good friend, producer in Burgundy now, who we kind of correspond and visited him quite a few times. And I've gone to Italy recently and really started to enjoy those wines. And of course, being a lover of Pinot Noir, I'm always loving to, try the German versions and anything else, New Zealand.
So if we were to come to your home, what kind of wines would we find in your cellar? Do you have a cellar, or is it just in the small fridge nearby?
I do have a cellar, and it's actually a very quick kind of cool story. I bought an old 1938 farmhouse in Healdsburg, and I set about to restore it. But when I purchased it from the original family, who had passed away. And of course, being in Dry Creek Valley, they were Italian, and so they made their own wines. And I'll never forget when I was exploring the house, when I found it, there was a basement. And it had what I call the Dorothy doors. Remember the Wizard of Oz? Mm-hmm. She went into the basement, they had the Dorothy doors. And so I went down, and underneath the house, my jaw just dropped. There was old bottles of like Carlo Rossi and little barrels and all the winemaking equipment from this Italian family, home winemaking. Wow. So I saved some of the stuff, when I bought the house, but set out. It's not a big space by any means. It's like 12 feet by 12 feet, I think, but it's under below grade and under the house. And so yes, I put in a little wine cellar down there. But if you go down there, I really, one of the things about being like a lot of winemakers, so I know a lot of my peers, being in this industry, we're very fortunate to be able to, acquire a lot of wines and trade wines. And there's always people, try this, so we've obviously accumulated a lot of California Pinot Noir. And I too, even as a winemaker, I'm still on a lot of lists that I've been on for over 20 years. There's some still producers out there that don't give industry discounts or anything else. And so I still purchase those wines as a consumer. And one of them, of course, is William Salem, which is one of the kind of iconic brands that I resonated with the number of vineyard designates they do and site-specific Pinots. And that was kind of a model that I carried on, and I've carried on throughout my career. So I really enjoy those. But primarily California Pinot. I am a big fan of Oregon Pinot. Probably the most, a region that I purchase the most from, I think, would be Oregon. I will occasionally kind of get excited if I see something, for like a Burgundy, like a white Burgundies are my absolute favorite. Obviously don't purchase a lot, drink a lot because I can't afford them. But when I do go to France, there's a couple shops that I know of that I'll go and I'll buy 2 or 3 cases and have them, shipped back on the next container, or something like that. So, but mostly California Pinot.
So I know that you focus on Pinot Noir, and that is a grape that you're very passionate about, but it's not a given to this question. Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety? No, I don't. I think that as winemakers and, seeing my peers, there's a path that we take, and it's either the love of a variety
I have friends who make, they're lovers of Zinfandel, or they're lovers of Cab. And then, of course, you have the historic aspect of Pinot Noir, and Cabernet, from the old world sites. But no, I don't.
And what's your take on, or your opinion on, wine critics and scores?
Well, I have to say that I like where it's going today. I like the change in philosophy among wine critics, and that there is a little bit more openness, not so style specific. I have personally never been a big fan because it is such a subjective product, and it's hard to be able to say, this is 100 points, versus. But then again, on the same token, I do see, how big these days, marketing plays a role. It's obvious that marketing and being in front of these critics and wining and dining them and everything else kind of pays off. But I like the new energy and the new philosophy and a little bit of the changing of the guard, so to speak. People that are, doing things like this, and a lot of some of the really good bloggers that, were in the industry or magazines that got shut down, and now they're bloggers, and they have very respectable palates, and they're taking time to taste and review and not, just be kind of one-sided.
Yeah. So as a consumer, red, white, or rosé?
All three.
Still or sparkling?
Always start with sparkling.
Champagne or domestic?
Preferably start with champagne. But because I'm making a domestic sparkling, I would move right into that domestic sparkling. But no, love of champagne. And
food and wine pairing, how do you approach that? Do you think there are hard and fast rules to follow? Having a diverse palette of drinking red, white, rosé, sparkling, champagne, domestic, it's a broad swath of wines. How do you look at that when you're choosing to pair with your food?
Great question. And I think that first thing that came to mind is what drives me crazy, Cabernet with fish. I've just never really, that one I don't get. However, yes, I think there is a pairing. I love to do it. I feel that I'm very fortunate making Pinot Noir, because Pinot Noir is so versatile with so many different foods. And I like making a number of different Pinots that can, like let's say a Pinot with that's a little bit fuller bodied that can stand up to a meat dish or a richer dish like that. But I do like to. I'm the cook in the family, and so I do like to make things that kind of pair well with Pinot. Or if I'm doing, if my wife and I wanted to open a bottle of white wine or something, a Chardonnay, and make her something and pair it with, a lighter fish or something like that. I enjoy it. Yeah.
And on those occasions where you drink a little too much, any special remedies or cures for those hangovers? Or you just don't get them?
Really silly question. I should say funny question, because we were just talking about this last night. You're being at the World of Pinot Noir.
It always seems like a silly question, except that when you work in this business, it's not a daily thing, but it's the hazard of being with friends and drinking a lot of wine.
Very well put. That's exactly it. I always say that I feel very lucky that I don't have that gene. I'm not a big drinker myself, and I watch it, and of course I have 2 daughters, and they're old enough now, but going through those years of raising children, tried to behave for the most part. But yes, hazards of the job, you do get away a little bit. My wife was saying, so last night we were at the bar a little late, and she loves Cynar. That is one of the kind of the digestives for her that works really well. And the funny thing with me, it's always worked well, is Guinness. If I love to have a Guinness as like my last drink of the night or something, and I'm not sure I'd love to go to Guinness in Dublin and actually go to the brewmaster and say, is it the iron content or, what is it? Because I always feel like it saves me from, a little bit from that, hardcore hangover, it kind of minimizes it a little bit.
Well, especially when you have to get up the next day and start pouring wine and drinking again.
Right? Yes. So so beer, but specifically Guinness do it for me.
Huh. So what do you think that somebody who hasn't tasted your wine is losing out on? What are you trying to convey through the wines that you make?
Great question. I as a winemaker, I've always wanted to stay consistent. I never made wines for scores. I never made wines for anyone or anything other than to just make a great balanced wine. And so I think that my wines, and now that I have a number of projects and I get to play a little bit with not necessarily styles, but the regions of which these wines are coming from. And I do like to make wines from a place, but I have wines from across the board, from kind of lighter to medium bodied to full bodied. But I think that those that, and especially being here at the World of Pinot now and running into customers and people that knew MacPhail wines and are now getting introduced to Tongue Dancer wines or San Giacomo wines, that there's of a consistent quality, a very high quality that is wines that are just balanced across the board. Alcohols are always in check. The use of oak, is always in balance. The wine itself, the chemistry, the acid, the acidity, and always I love to make beautifully elegant, balanced wines.
So if space aliens were to land on your property, which of the wines would you want to present them with?
Oh boy. So today I would say, one of my favorite vineyard sources right now is a vineyard that I'm able to make for 3 of my clients. And it's Putnam Vineyard out in Annapolis on Annapolis Ridge Road. And it's what we call kind of like the true Sonoma Coast, really pushing the envelope. And those wines are kind of very rich and luxurious in mouthfeel and texture. They're more full-bodied, beautiful balance of fruit and earth. And it's a wine that it almost has everything. It's not that perfect wine, but it has all the elements that someone who loves Pinot Noir can experience. Mm-hmm. Fruit, earth, layers and layers of different flavors and different kind of characteristics. The wine is more medium to kind of full-bodied, which stylistically, I guess I don't know if at my age or at this stage of my career, I'm really enjoying making wines that really resonate. Again, that the mouthfeel and the texture and everything else.
So with all of your experience in making wine and the years you've been doing it, we know that there's vintage variation, that each year tells a different story. But have you found that from year to year, you see more commonalities, or do you feel there's really a unique difference from year to year?
There's an absolute unique difference year to year. I find that. And I think that especially in California, with the challenges that we've had in the last 5 to 6 years, we had the 4 years of drought. We had fires. We've had epic winters now. We've had, 13, 14, we had, the earliest harvest on record. Next vintage, the latest harvest on record. So, one of the biggest challenges every year is the weather now. It has really become unpredictable. And that obviously translates immediately into, the vintage and the style and everything else. And I think that's one of the hardest things as a winemaker these days is to consistently make wines, regardless of what Mother Nature throws at you, that can stand up with the best wines in the world.
And do you have any signs or predictors that you look at to see kind of what a harvest is going to tell you? Is there something that will kind of forewarn what you're going to experience?
Absolutely. My wife always kind of giggles because I'm a big weather watcher now. As a farmer, you have to remember that this is still an agriculturally driven product. And I think some of my peers kind of forget that, forget that the importance of, just today, it's still raining. We got rain next week. And, it was a year ago, 2 weeks that we already had bud break in Russian River. And as a winemaker, to remember that or to know that is to help with, okay, it's now March 3rd. March 2nd. And, a year ago, we already had bud break. And now we're looking at, on March 2nd, maybe, with the weather forecast, no bud break for probably another good 2 to 3 weeks. So yes, I have a pulse on that, and I'm already thinking what that means for the 2019 harvest.
And when harvest comes, do you have any traditions that you do for yourself or with your team?
Shot of tequila with the team.
Is that right before you start to pick, or?
Could be. No, actually, the tradition is with the start, the first day of harvest, for each brand is always a shot of tequila around the first bin of grapes. Yeah. And I don't know, it started years ago. I think that because I'm not a big tequila drinker, I do like tequila, but I think my wife started that one. I think she was the instigator of that. It's kind of like a celebratory, something different, something that, shot of tequila, 8 in the morning is rarely done, but it works. But why not? And it works.
So walking through the vineyards and all the vineyards that you're working with, have you been caught ever talking to the vines? And if not, when they get into the cellars, do you ever talk to the wine that's in the barrels and encourage it or tell it's doing a good job? Or what kind of conversation, if any, do you have with your grapes?
There have been all kinds of conversations. There have been pleasing, nice conversations. There's been angry conversations. There's been expletive-filled conversations. Yes, as a winemaker, you experience it all. And I think that it's funny. It's every year is like a life. Of course, which is really cool. Of course, we all know about the cycle of the vine, and when it comes to harvest, and then turning that fruit and coaxing it into wine and everything else. I think we all start with this giddiness and this excitement of the next harvest, and being able to try our craft again and take what we've learned about over the course of our careers, and implement that into this vintage, and this is going to be the best yet. And so you start the year giddy and walking the vine, walking the rows in the vineyards, and I don't speak too much of them out there. I do talk to myself. So I'm sure if there was a mic on a drone hovering above me, that there had been some conversations. They're always positive. They're always good. Rarely are they bad. But yes, I talk a lot, all kinds throughout the course in the life of making wine.
So you said that you started making wine when you were in your mid-20s, but when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Professional baseball player. I was a swimmer, and that was my sport, and I excelled in that and swam in college and did really well. But if I could go back, and I know as a kid, I was always fascinated with baseball, and I thought, oh my gosh, what a life if you could, go out onto a baseball field every day and play baseball for a living. But then I did have some other funny ones. I always wanted to be a ship captain. I'm not sure where that came from. Probably I traveled a lot as a kid. My dad's passion, his hobby was traveling. And so he would take my sister and I out of school sometimes and take us on a business trip of his, or day after we were out for summer vacation, we were on a plane somewhere. And so travel was always kind of a, airplane pilot. That was one. But I think ultimately was a professional baseball player.
And when you're not working, how do you spend your free time now?
Well, my wife and I are officially empty nesters now. So the youngest is off to college. And so that pretty much answers the question of the last 18 years. There was no time.
Right.
And there is something about this industry where, it is a labor of love. And so we work a lot, and we have a winery. We have a winery at our home. And so that's an added facility and building and everything else to be close to the wines. And so there was always work, But now that we are official empty nesters, it's a lot of fun to we found ourselves kind of going to the city and, being able to spend the night, because we don't have to come home, or extended vacations, or it's kind of an interesting, hard on one hand, being empty nesters, but no, we really enjoy, I enjoy to cook. That's my downtime. Once I get away from the daily responsibilities and get into the kitchen, and I'll cook, and I'll love to try recipes and pairing, like you questioned earlier about trying a new dish, with a Pinot or something. But we still don't have a tremendous amount of time in this industry. Always look forward to the family vacations. My oldest is graduating college this year, and she, of course, made me super happy because she said she wanted to go someplace warm. So that's straight to the beach. So we can't wait for that. But we walk to town. We live close to town, Healdsburg, and Karen and I love to walk to town, ride our bikes. Love to watch movies. Yeah.
Just all the quiet things to do.
Yeah, decompressing after the long day.
Well, now that the kids are out of the house, you're able to have more romantic evenings. So, for a romantic evening, what wines would you be pulling out to impress your wife?
Well, since I know her so well,
as I would hope,
she loves to pull out the older vintages of my wines, which is a lot of fun. We call her the librarian. Mm-hmm. So if you want to know any inventory of any wine, she knows it immediately, which is a lot of fun and she also loves to surprise. So if I was in charge of the romantic evening, that's a good question. I would definitely start with bubbles, like probably a champagne. Favorite, both hers and my favorite are like a Brut Rosé. But then I would probably pull out an older MacPhail wine, like maybe from the early 2000s or something, and those are always fun to try. But I think that would be it.
So, what would you say is the best piece of advice you ever received?
Well, I grew up in a family business, and I really admired my father for his business acumen and the history of that business. It's been around started in 1880 and still going today. And unfortunately, my father passed away in my early 20s. But when his advice, I think, to me early on was integrity, like an honesty. It really instilled that in my sister and I. And I think how I know, kind of going off on my own and then starting my own brand and where I am today, I am someone who, in both my winemaking and wines, but also in business, we've stayed true, we've stayed honest, and made wines with integrity and ran our business with integrity.
And if you could offer advice to our listeners today, what piece of advice would you like to share with them?
Try wines, try different wines, try wines you haven't heard of. Get out of the little bit of the rut of, the brand names and try new things.
And what would you say that to date is your proudest achievement in your work?
Proudest achievement in my work, I would say the ability to kind of sit here today and know that I've made kind of a number of great wines that I think could stand up to some of the great wines, either domestic or proud to put them into a European or international, lineup. Like the great Chateau Montelena of the Judgment of Paris, to be able to do something like that. And I think in winemaking, my proudest would be that I've been consistent. That I've always been consistent.
So complete this sentence for me. A table without wine is like?
It's horrible. A table without wine is empty. It's empty.
Okay. So a celebrity, VIP, from any walk of life, living or deceased, is sitting at a table and the paparazzi snap a photo. And sitting on that table behind this person is a bottle of your wine, one of your wines. Who would you want that person to be drinking your wine?
Wow, I've never had a question like that before.
Gotta keep you on your toes.
Oh my goodness, that's a good one. I'm not too kind of celebrity driven. I think it would be more of like a historical person.
That's fine.
I think of like someone like Martin Luther King, or someone who's really made an impact in life, or kind of our society. I would have to say, I don't know right now. That's a good question. You're stumping me a little bit on that one.
We can stick with Martin Luther King.
Yeah, stick with that. Yeah.
So, what do you think we'll be drinking in 500 years' time, 1,000 years' time, assuming wine will continue as it has for 1,000 some odd years? What do you think we'll be drinking?
I hope so. I hope that, because wine is such a historical, traditional product, I hope that in 500 years, that we, if climate change was off the board and all things considered, we're stayed, normal and consistent. I hope that wine is it. I think that, we all know that there's cyclical patterns to products and everything else, and that, that craft beer is coming up and cocktails are coming up. And, but I truly believe that wine will survive the test of time. I really do.
So this is a pretty common question when you're asked what wine can you take to a deserted island. I'm going to ask you what 3 wines you would take with you to a deserted island.
Well, that's perfect, because I would take a champagne, a Brut Rosé, and then I would take a white Burgundy, and then I would take a California Pinot.
Okay. From Sonoma Coast, Russian River?
Yes, probably Sonoma Coast.
Okay. And what is one winemaking area in the world that's at the top of your bucket list? I'm sure there are plenty of places you want to travel, and you've started traveling. What's next? What's at the top of the list that you want to go explore?
New Zealand. Just got back from Italy, and that was a lot of fun. I've really been fascinated and fallen in love with the Italian wine industry. I'm not saying that because really, so my wife and I went to Positano in the end of July, and we went, as it's always on my bucket list to go, but I wanted to just drink the white wines and eat fish. Yeah. And so we did for 5 days. And I just thought the white wines were just phenomenal. So that was an experience that I just went through, with a little bit of focus as well. What's really interesting to me is New Zealand. And I know it hasn't, the Pinots are really starting to, kind of come around, and it hasn't, well, personally, I don't really think it's taken off like we all thought it would, but some of the Pinots that I have out of New Zealand are really beautiful wines. And I would like to explore that region.
So before we finish today, one of the little game that we play at the end is about wine and music, since there's always a correlation. One way or another, we like to listen to music, we like to drink wine, so let's combine them. Just based on a couple of the wines we talked about today, tell me what you'd be listening to. It can be a genre, it can be a style, it can be a particular song or musician. It's up to you. But for your desert island that you're going to, that champagne, that Brut Rosé champagne.
Louis Armstrong.
The white Burgundy.
The white Burgundy would be, Coltrane.
And what about that Russian River Pinot Noir?
That would be a little bit more, Russian River Pinot would be, James Brown.
Well, thank you. Might as well end James talk with James Brown. But James, I want to thank you for joining us today at Wine Soundtrack. And before we go, can you just let our listeners know where they can find your wines? Can they visit you and taste them in person? Let us know. Yeah,
absolutely. So we have probably the best way to taste the myriad of wines that I have my hands in now would be at my home. In Healdsburg. Everyone's welcome. Not all at once and not on a Sunday morning before 10 o'clock. But no, I did build a winery at my home in Healdsburg for the MacPhail brand back in the day. And now I'm making a couple of my clients there. But we have a beautiful, private tasting room that would be anyone's welcome. Just call and make an appointment. I'm happy to taste you on some of the wines. About a mile from the square in Healdsburg, so very easy to get to, kind of out in the country, out in Dry Creek Valley.
Great.
And 433-4780, area code 707.
Great. And then the wines, as you mentioned, with San Giacomo and with Tongue Dancer, they're both available direct to consumer, so online as well?
Correct. Yeah, sangiacomowines.com and tonguedancerwines.com.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again for joining us and have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Allison.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.